evening, esteemed panelists. I thank you for being here today to share your opinion and views on human capital and its relevance to business and economies. As we speak of human capital in the present-day circumstance, we also speak of its transformational paradigms in the new world and the importance of building hybrid workplaces while sustaining purpose, transparency, and the feel of belonging. With this, I now invite Ananda Ghosh, partner Deloitte, to lead the session. Andy, the session is now yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Queenie, and thank you very much, Economic Times ILC, for setting this up for us. The next hour or so that we have, we have two things that we want to cover in the next hour. One is we will do a quick background to a report that we are coming out with along with Economic Times ILC on some of these topics, and then spend the rest of the time, which is about 45-50 minutes, talking to a team, to a panel of experts and business leaders in India and outside, who we want to ask about their views in terms of what they see as the future of the hybrid workforce and how they are really shepherding their organizations in adapting to this workforce or the workplace. We will, so before I begin, I think if it's, before I begin with the panel, what I'll do is I will request if you could put up the slide in terms of what we want to do with our report going forward. Essentially, what we are doing is, if you look at the world over, the last 24 months has been a bit of a seesaw of sorts in terms of how people have looked at what is the future of the workplace, the future of the workforce, and so on. And one of the things that's initially we started off by saying that the world will entirely become virtual. Every organization talked about the fact that virtual workplaces are absolute reality. It's easy to manage. It's very productive. And therefore, there is no reason to come back to office. And this lasted for a good 18-20 months. But suddenly, when COVID started going down in its impact, people also started equally talking about the fact that a dissipated virtual workforce also does not drive innovation, does not allow people to interact more freely, openly, etc. And therefore, for culture to be built, for culture to be more effective, people have to come back to office. The reality will be somewhere in the middle. I mean, there will probably not be a fully. May not start looking like 2015 or 2018. We might not again look like 2021. We might not all be working virtually. We will probably all not be working physically. But whichever way the reality is, the bigger questions today is that given the new world order, given the way technology is changing, given the way capital is chasing organizations and people, there is also a new reality of there being a massive amount of resignations, a massive amount of flux in organizations and so on. Two things are coming out on all of this. One is the fact that organizations need stronger and more creative leadership at this point of time to be able to build more sustainable workspaces, to be able to build more sustainable teams. And second is the organizations have to be able to create a learning environment from within their employees to be able to have them adapt to this new world or adapt to the new skill requirements, etc. The whole dimension of how people are going to be impactful in their workspace will completely depend on what kind of skills they're able to bring in. And our report basically is an attempt to identify on how organizations are actually doing these things. The interesting thing that you'll find across most of the conversations that us consultants or even any discussions, there is a lot of reference to the West in terms of how the West is doing these things, how companies in the US and Europe are doing it. What we want to do is use this report or use the study to be able to understand what are Indian companies or companies based in India doing in this space in being able to drive stronger leadership culture, leadership pools, as well as a stronger learning culture within the organization. And in this, we are using a combination of actual data that we are collecting from organizations, from people who are functional leaders, employees. We're also talking to a whole host of CEOs and CHROs to get their perspective, and also some of our own research that we have done in this area over the last 1.5 years. This is something that we are going to come to you in the next 1 month with, but one of the discussions or one of the key inputs into this particular report will also be the discussion that we're having today. And that's why we are so excited about this conversation today, because this is really, in some sense, the first time that we are going to be talking to a bunch of leaders who have and understand their perspective in terms of what they have done or are doing at this point of time as they build their organizations for this new world order. I would like to segue into the panel right now and do a quick introduction of all the panelists that I have with me. So on the panel we have with us, and I'm going in no particular order, but I have Shashank Jha. Shashank is the country manager and CEO of Baker Hughes Oilfield Equipment India. I have Sanjeev Navangul, who is the managing director and CEO of Bharat Serums and Vaccines. I have Prateek Dattani, who is the managing director of Economic Policy Group. He's based in London. And I also have Pradeep Shekhar, who is the managing director of Optiv. Between the five of them, they obviously represent very different kinds of industry backgrounds and contexts. Shashank is someone who runs an organization which has a very large field force. Sanjeev obviously runs an organization which has come into the forefront a lot over the last 1.5 years. Prateek runs an organization where it has a significant amount of thinking and consulting. Prateek and Pradeep, I'm sorry, are both running organizations that are doing a lot of thinking in this space. We also will have Ritesh joining us in a bit. He's the MD of he's the MD of Optum, but he's not here right now, but he'll be joining us in a couple of minutes. But what we want to do in this conversation over the next 45-50 minutes or so is to basically understand a little bit from all of our panelists about what they are seeing as the future for their organizations. How much of this is going to be hybrid, or how much of this is going to be actually virtual or physical. The interesting thing that we always find is that hybrid per se is probably always a point-in-time solution than a permanent one. And that's maybe that's a perception that I have, which I would love to be challenged with. But that's the first thing I want to start off with all of you. That do you see this? And I'll go around the four of you right now. Do you see this as something that is just the hybrid workforce is just a segue into going back into a fully return to office mode, or is hybrid workforce here to stay? So just a 30-second round the room. Give me a yes or no, if you will, or just whatever a short answer from you. I'll start with you, Shashank.
Hey, the hybrid workforce is here to stay. We're not going back to pre-hybrid ever again. That's what I believe.
Okay. Sanjeev.
I think this has been a good way to manage work. And people have got comfortable with the benefits of hybrid work. So it's there to stay, but the balance will dramatically change. It will not be so much towards the culture of work from home. I think the balance will change.
Okay. Prateek?
I think it's here to stay, at least for the near term. I think realistically, I think in 3 or 4 years, we'll be back to normal because people will miss that interpersonal connection.
Okay. And Pradeep?
Yeah, I'm definitely here to stay, right? So being in a professional services organization, so this is something that we've been used to, but in terms of what we see, the way our clients work and how we work with our different clients, this is something we're seeing a major shift as well, right? So yeah, definitely here to stay in terms of how in the near future, it's going to be completely more hybrid, and then probably slowly but surely, there's going to be a very mixed definition of how much of it is going to be in a particular week, how much are we going to be working out of office versus how much of the days employers are going to be comfortable having employees working from anywhere, right? So yeah.
Interesting. So I have Shashank, and it's almost a debate of sorts. I have Shashank and Pradeep who are very emphatic about hybrid being here to stay, and Sanjeev and Prateek who are on the fence on this a little bit. And Prateek for sure sees that this is going to go back into a physical workspace very soon. So gentlemen, you've been on many panels before, and I'm sure you appreciate this entirely, that the real value of the conversation happens when you can be absolutely blunt. So I'll try and be blunt from my end in my questions, and I'd request if you could also be blunt from your end. I know there are boundary conditions within which we sometimes operate, but let's try and be as honest as we can in this conversation, because this is something that's really going to help in us framing our opinions as well. So I'll start with you, Prateek. You said that you're very sure that in a couple of years we're going to go back into a more physical work environment. So tell me, is 2024, let's say, going to look like 2015 rather?
So I'd split that answer into probably three parts. One is outlook from a senior perspective, junior perspective, and then pay. So I run offices in three countries, which are all very different: Uganda in East Africa, Bangalore, and then in London. In London, we're all pretty used to working from home. Most of us live outside London and commute in, and we are very comfortable just being at home 5 days a week. On the other end of the spectrum in Uganda, it's really difficult to get people to work from home because there are electricity problems, internet problems, people living in much larger joint families than in India. So it's just not practical to have 2-3 people in the family working in a house together. So in Uganda, I think practically we've tried to go back to the office as quickly as we possibly can. Otherwise, productivity has been significantly impacted. From a junior staff perspective, I think if we're hiring new people, whether that's interns or new analysts, 80% of what they learn is not the technical work they will have implemented from university or how to create a formula on a spreadsheet. It's sitting next to senior staff members, listening into phone conversations, water cooler moments, and all of that is gone. So in terms of career development for junior staff, I think it's significantly tougher for their early career trajectory. So I think there's the biggest challenge, whether it's in London or elsewhere. And then the third aspect on the pay, I know this is a conversation that's come up with lots of firms in London, but if you are spending a considerable portion of your pay commuting into your office, you're spending 2-3 hours a day coming to work and back again, then spending on lunch and other ancillary costs. If all those costs are removed, then should you still earn that same pay? So if your salary goes up by, let's say, 5% or 10% a year by default, should you still have that? Technically, from an economist perspective, your salary should be commensurate with the marginal productivity gains you bring to the organization per hour. If you're slightly less productive at home, but also you've saved 20% of your salary in terms of costs, then should you be paid the same? I think on this, it's very contextual to the country, to the industry, maybe even to the city. So I think there we haven't reached an answer. But I think where we are in 2024 will really depend on how junior staff respond to career development and professional development, and to a more economy-wide conversation around this space, certainly in a developed market like London.
Thank you, Prateek. I think the question on pay and is something I'll come back to again. But with the other point you mentioned about large families, etc., I think all other panelists on this will echo the fact that this is not just the Uganda phenomenon; it's very much an Indian phenomenon as well. I know Shashank mentioned that he's in Bombay. We have tiny houses here, so someone who's at the junior end of the spectrum will have the same challenge here as anywhere else. But Shashank, I actually want to come back to you. You said very emphatically hybrid is here to stay, and you have clearly a large workforce that has never been hybrid. It's always been at the workplace, so to speak. What's your sense, and why do you think hybrid will always be around?
So, going by hard metrics, right? We as business leaders like to measure output by metrics. So initial few days of hybrid, we were really concerned that engineering and technical output and productivity would go down. We were surprised to actually see it go up. To a large extent, we all now realize it's possibly because working purely virtually blurred the boundaries between home and office. So people were actually working longer hours because there was no transit and there was nothing else to do. That it sort of cooled off over time and people started to find the balance, right? So eventually we still ended up with a slightly higher productivity on a lot of the workforce, which was, we never imagined they would work out of office and inside their homes. With some people, it's absolutely impossible for them to really work from home or work in a hybrid environment. I've got field force, which, they have to go to an offshore rig and install equipment, right? That costs, billions of dollars. They can't work from home. So they would never understand hybrid. But hey, even those guys, when they work their 28 days offshore and they come back and then they have to spend the 28 days with family, they might have to show up at office for some paperwork. They don't have to do that anymore, right? In our offices, with hot desking, you're actually able to manage a lot more people without really having to build the infrastructure to build more desks, because people are happy coming to office 2 to 3 days to collaborate. And for people like us in Mumbai, right, hard facts, I would hate the time when I would have to stop any conference call and because there's no network on the way. If you're driving, then forget about getting into a call for 1.5, 2 hours. You don't know how long. I've actually come back midway and trying to get to a meeting because I just couldn't get there on time because there's just so much traffic, and came back and taken the meeting on phone. Now you can just plan your day. Okay, my day might start a bit early. It might start at 7. I might get a break for 4 hours in between because the Singapore and Australia time zones are winding up for the day, and UK and US are not fully kicked in yet. So I spent some time with family. Why would I want to go back to a full-time 9 to 5 office when it really isn't built for me? It was built for the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm happy going to office or to a client site or to a field site or to my international locations once every maybe a couple of weeks, so that we put a name to the face. We have that camaraderie, go out, have a drink or a coffee together, get that relationship going. Next time the discussion is over a phone call, and I don't spend a day or two traveling just to spend that half an hour with the person for a half an hour meeting that will be done on Teams or Zoom. Right? So I really don't see the impact on productivity, the cost being simply reversed and going back full time to office working. Right? Hybrid is here to stay. Some part of some people get bored after 2 years. So to factor in what Prateek is saying, big families, you might not want to work 5 days, 6 days a week back to back for 2 years. You might want to go to office, but that is what hybrid is, right? You work from home for 3 days, 4 days, go to office a couple of days, do stuff that you just can't do at home. And that's what is hybrid, right? Figure out what that number of days is, 1, 2, 3, you're not going back to 5 days, 10 hours a day. So I don't think so.
That's interesting, and I think coming from Bombay, I think that resonates for any big city. As a matter of fact, that resonates. The time benefits that you're getting out of this right now. But Sanjeev, you also have a large team that is permanently going to be at work, be there in the sales teams or be that in manufacturing and so on. Why do you think you will not be able to keep it hybrid for too long?
So, Anand, it's like this. That first of all, as you correctly said, I think the luxury of discussing hybrid work actually rests so much with the tertiary sector. The secondary sector is an option choice, option thing that what functions can operate out of where. And for the primary sector, it's a no choice situation. So I think let's also first disseminate that a large part of our workforce all over the world is not about hybrid. There's no discussion there. I think the more noisier part of the workforce is in the tertiary sector. So there's a lot of noise around this hybrid story and all. First, let us understand the basics, right? So it's about a noisier group that is making a lot of noise about this story. The second thing is, I think the important factor is that there are many areas where you cannot function from home. And as you mentioned, manufacturing is a classic case. Field is a classic case, customer interface is a classic case. So we have a lot of if you look at our organization, out of the, let's say 2,200 employees, I think about 400 employees have a possibility of looking at hybrid work. So that's a small number. Out of those 400, there are about 100, 150 in R&D who might have to be in the labs. So then the number of people that you're talking about also reduces in an organization based on the type of organization. So that's important to understand, that based on the type of organization, based on the function that we operate, based on the jobs that we do, the story of hybrid work will unfold. What I do believe is, I think, and since probably I worked at, I was heading J&J earlier, and therefore we were used to doing 4 days a week from office and 1 day from home. So there is a sense where there are organizations which will move towards partially working from home for several benefits that the person who is working from home gets. And I think the benefits are explained a little bit earlier by Shashank. So I think those benefits do accrue to people, and people are willing to do that, and that we should offer. I think in organizations like us, what we will end up doing is that we will maybe have 3 days from office, 2 days from home, just to ensure that the benefits come to people. But as a couple of years have gone, we have started to see the downsides of work from home or hybrid workplaces, or what's happening around there. And one of the biggest downsides, and as a healthcare person, let me put it on the table, which is like an elephant in the room, is the mental health stories coming out of this balance are substantial in nature to form another epidemic. Because of human contact being already reduced by technology and further human contact being reduced, we are seeing an outbreak of mental health issues. And if you look at the, let's say, I'll just give you one statistic and let me stop. If you look at the traffic towards psychologists has increased by 700% world over. And all because of the condition that we were in. It could be, the condition could be in the sense that I was cooped up at home, or otherwise I was working and I did not have human interaction. It could be either ways. But these are issues that will come up, and therefore human beings or societies being more say interactive in nature. I think the movement towards lesser work from home and more towards office spaces is going to increase in most sectors of the industry.
Thank you for that. And I think it's what you highlighted about the whole aspect around who can really be hybrid or where is this noise coming from is a very real one. This is a statistic from Income Tax India website. The average salary of someone who files taxes in India is less than 3.5 lakhs annually. Someone who's earning less than 3.5 lakhs annually pretty much can't have a very good work from home environment anywhere to begin with, or probably doesn't even have the flexibility to work from home. So really, it is a smaller population that has the ability to go hybrid. But Pradeep, I wanted to come to you because the last point that Sanjeev mentioned about how it is affecting both from a mental health perspective as well as your workforce is primarily, I would imagine, a workforce that is you're primarily in the services segment. Your workforce needs to be able to solve problems for organizations and so on. So how do you see this happening? And you are very clear that you will operate hybrid going forward as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Anand, for that. And I echo Sanjeev's points as well, right? Because it's going to vary by organization, because all those who can operate from an hybrid mode will definitely go there. Right? That's become kind of the expectation going forward. So gone are the days when the norm was the expectation that somebody's going to be working from home, and very rarely the exception was people be able to work from anywhere, right? But today, with the workforce that has kind of seen and tasted the ability to work from anywhere, so that's something that has become like an expectation when you want to attract and retain talent going forward as well. And when we have employees working from anywhere, cooped up in front of their laptops and continuously on Zoom meetings every time, definitely mental health issues is something that definitely does take a toll. So what we try to do is varying from organization to organization, right? So we try to have these constant support structures set up within the organization, wherein they could have conversations with professionals that are paid for by the organization should a need arise. Otherwise, we do have talent organizations within the company who kind of take an initiative to, let's say, host a fun Friday, right? Or have a no Zoom Friday, if you will, right? So trying to see how we can work with with our professionals that are working remotely to bring down that stress and the screen time that they have to obviously consume going forward. So that's something that's definitely top of mind for organizations, and something that is also, we are also keenly looking at what are other things that we could do to enable a smoother experience for them.
So Pradeep, if I may pause you. So from your perspective, again, you're kind of a company, and maybe Prateek has probably a similar view as well, but how is the role of the manager changing in an environment where you're expecting the person to be doing his job on the Zoom primarily? So what does a manager who's supposed to manage do anymore?
Okay, well, that's a great question, right? So we've been in a model, given it's a professional services organization, I would say we have predominantly been in a kind of hybrid model, wherein even before the pandemic, 3-4 days, like what Sanjeev was saying, employees do come into office, and 1 or 2 days a week they do work from home, right? Now, so back then you do have that personal connect and touch point wherein you're able to, I would say, have being able to ensure certain accountability as well in terms of the way our employees work. Now, as part of being a manager in this completely hybrid work mode, it falls down to how can the manager not be superimposing, but have one-on-one connects with the professionals on a frequent basis to be able to understand what the mental health is, and more or less have like a mental health metric, right? So how does your team and the members on your team, how are they faring in terms of being able to respond to their tasks? But again, not being overbearing by continuously being on, let's say, connecting with them twice a day, and not make it like a micromanager kind of a sort, right? So that's something that is a fine line and balance that managers are being coached upon in order to be able to better respond to their employees' concerns.
So Sanjeev, I wanted to check with you. What's your manager doing now?
I think one of the things that probably in the last 2 years most managers learned, and which was great, was because of the situation of pandemic. I think managers learned what is what is empathy, and what is it that taking care means. Because in every family, something or the other happened. Somebody fell sick, something happened. So I think that angle of how you understand the other person in your team has gone up substantially. So that is one good part that has happened. Secondly, the managers sometimes struggles with the balance of in a work from anywhere environment. You can keep back-to-back meetings, and the breaks don't happen, and necessarily the mental let's say rest that people get between meetings doesn't happen. So the managers are struggling there to understand that it's not great to organize back-to-back meetings without. The third thing the managers are, I think, learning to understand is that what is monitoring. Do you monitor over the shoulder, or do you really monitor the output? And do you really care for what the work is being done, or do you really care for how the person is behaving? I think that's something that people are learning to understand. And the fourth thing that we have seen our managers understand is that how to gauge what is happening without understanding body language. And that's a very interesting phenomenon from a judgment point of view. So there are several things that managers are learning. The temptation to call a meeting off the hat is going up. And this, I think we are starting to see that more and more, and we're starting to educate managers that this is not a great thing. So I would say there are a lot of behavioral changes that we are seeing in managers, more than skill changes. I think the skill is a result of behavior rather than the other way around that we found in earlier times. So there is that shift that is happening in managers.
Actually, thank you for that. That's an interesting point, because what it does, and maybe Shashank, you can talk about this a little bit from your context as well. What does it, like, what is the role of the manager in actually managing them? Because the person broadly is now able to understand, is like Sanjeev said, managing to outcomes, right? You also said managing to metrics. And when you're not in front of the person, when you're not being able to talk to the person, put an arm around the shoulder, whatever have you, isn't the role of just managing a much smaller role today than doing?
Absolutely. This is a very valid question, and clearly there is no direct answer, as Sanjeev said. A lot of people are evolving, they're picking up the skills on how do you actually manage when all you've got is this camera in front of you, right, and a laptop. How you used to manage in the past was you put your arms around the shoulder of the guy, go for a walk, go for a tea, go for a smoke, and then tell boss, that's any other. This is not how you do it. This is what you should do. This is how you should do it, blah, blah, blah. Right? And you could see the expressions on the face. You could see the non-game time performance of the person walking with drooping shoulders or walking with, shoulders spread out. Body language would tell you a lot of what you need to know. And now I can see the managers struggling at times, because there are some employees who sink, some employees who rise to the top in this, right? The employees who sink are the ones who think they're doing a lot of work because they're putting in a lot of hours, but then they are missing the hard metrics because nothing is happening. What happens is they don't get the outcome. It's, as I like to say, and my daughter is in 10th grade, and I was going through her physics book. Work formula was force into distance, right? A lot of these guys apply all their force into pushing a wall from morning 9 to evening 6. The wall doesn't move, so no work is done because work is force into distance. So that's something in the virtual world I have to tell people, right? Don't sweat yourself out. Don't tire yourself out so much without realizing that you aren't actually doing the work and not asking for help. So a part of this virtual or hybrid working, as you said, the context segue into the hybrid working of the future is, you do get to spend some face-to-face time with these employees in this hybrid environment. even in the virtual environment, this non-game time conversation, So what I do or what my managers do is they set up a pulse call where we don't talk about work, right? We talk for 1 hour about just the people themselves. How are you doing? How are your kids managing? Are they getting back to school? Did someone in your near circle get COVID? What's on your mind? Are you managing your insurance, your finances well? How are you investing? Just random stuff that people would be worried about, but never talk about. Right? And again, the role of a manager has now become from a manager to, sort of like a family member, an elder brother as well to a certain extent. Because are you getting the support that you require? That you require to grow as an individual and in the same time grow as a manager, grow as someone who can grow my organization with you. So yeah, the roles, and it is going to evolve. And one more thing, if I haven't run out of time, is that we're still measuring people from the same tools we used to measure them with, when things were different. Right? So the only thing which has changed pre-COVID and now is we're talking through Zoom, which wasn't existent, possibly Teams. We figured out how to share our screen. Collaboration tools will have to improve further, right? For the, either virtual or hybrid world to evolve a little bit more, right? Can you hear me? Am I on mute? Can you see my video? I'm frozen. Please ignore the noise. That's my dog. That, when there would be tools which actually help you cut out some of the distractions, right? My daughter doesn't get distracted. She plays Roblox, in a metaverse, and she's collaborating, walking around a corridor, dancing in a school with a friend virtually. And she doesn't seem to mind that he does, they can actually meet up in the garden downstairs. So, our virtual collaboration tools are still 18th century. They will need to sharpen up. They'll need to improve for the virtual collaboration and the hybrid world to succeed. Otherwise, as you rightly said, as Sanjeev so nicely put, primary, secondary, tertiary sector, we have the luxury to talk about because we used to work on a laptop, right? So we can still work from home. There's a bunch of folks who walk into a shop floor and they have to work with the tools. They don't have the choice unless you start doing 3D printing and some of these tools, your technology evolves to a certain extent. A bunch of that work can actually be done from a remote location, which is all technology, right? Which is not there currently. It's there, but it's not, applied technology at this point of time. So there you go.
No, actually, thanks, Shashank, for that. Actually, I'll come back to this point on performance management because I wanted to touch upon these two things that I picked up, both on performance management and on pay, that I think are harder aspects beyond just the softer aspects of managing. But Prateek, you've always managed a global workforce, right? In the sense you were talking about having employees across 3 very disparate geographies, India, UK, Uganda. You are based in UK. So what you have always been doing in a sense of managing a very distant workforce virtually to a large extent is something that many of the other leaders around the world are starting to do right now for their organizations. What would you say are the biggest, things that you can never get to do right in the way you have been having to manage with someone like, I'm just making it up, maybe like Shashank or Sanjeev or Pradeep are able to do because they are in the same physical location?
I think picking up on Sanjeev's point around managers developing empathy, I think that's one. And also Shashank's point around some employees being better at reaching out and some people being less so. So for example, if I think about inherent self-confidence about people at work, an American is very, very self-confident and is able to ask for whatever he wants. Somebody in London slightly less so. Somebody in India maybe slightly more introvert, and somebody in Uganda even far more introvert. So then if you have a virtual team, you'll always have some junior members of staff who perform better simply because they're better at asking. And if they don't know the answer to something, they're comfortable saying, I don't know the answer. Can you please help me? And then a manager is able to identify those signs and work with them more. And the more introvert members of the team are less able to do that. So the productivity maybe goes down, not because of their own fault, but simply because their personality is slightly more introvert. So I think that's always been an interesting thing to manage. The way COVID has played out in Uganda, the way political situation has played out in Uganda and some of the other countries that we have projects in Malawi, in Kenya, and Burundi, has always also been a challenge. So for example, I would have a good sense of what is going on in the macro environment, maybe in London and in India, but not so much in the respective East African countries. So there, I think managing internationally becomes a challenge because you don't want to say something wrong, but at the same time, somebody who you're talking to may have something going on at the back of their mind, which is very contextual to that country, which simply because BBC doesn't report it or Indian media doesn't report it that much doesn't mean it's not happening. So I think that's been a challenge that I've seen over the last several years. Pre-COVID, I think the way we mitigated against it is the London team traveling to the locations 2 or 3 times a year, and then you kind of pick up on all of these things much more. Now, for example, in 2019, I probably was abroad 5 months of the year. But in the last 6 months, I've only been outside the country for probably 3 weeks. So I think some of those things are a challenge, particularly when we're working with clients that, let's say it's an American client with a London team building a power station in Malawi. There's a lot of intercultural issues that unless you're physically co-located or you meet people regularly, it's tough to manage.
So let me now turn to the 2 points that I wanted to come back to at some point in this. One is, and whoever is comfortable talking about it, I know Prateek, you've already spoken about it a bit, but Shashank, Pradeep, or Sanjeev, if I am an employee in your organization and if I am working my office isn't supposed to be in Bombay, but I've chosen to work from Lucknow, making it up, right? And you say that I'll pay you less because you're working in a lower cost location, you're not commuting, etc., etc. Do you think I would say that doesn't matter? I'll come back and work in Bombay. I don't want to be in Lucknow. If you're going to pay me 15% less, either I'll go find a job which pays me that 15% difference, or I'll come back to Bombay and make that money. Or will I say it's okay? 15% is good. I am actually spending less. I'll stay where I am. What will your employee be? Which side of the spectrum will your employee be at?
It's actually very real for me. That's why maybe I would want to go first on this. I've got a team which was based in Bombay. And there was this guy who was married and his wife was in Germany. He asked me 4 months into the pandemic, boss, can I go to Germany and work from there? I said, if you're okay waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and if you can manage in the salary that I'm giving to you in India, feel free to go. So he's been working out of Germany and UK in London for the last 1.5 years. He travels back to India, of course, out of his own pocket. And given that we haven't seen any drop in productivity, I'm happy to actually move him to our London office so that he can continue working from the London office and supporting us here. Right? There's people who's working from Muzaffarnagar or, people who are working from Calcutta. There's a lot of people who are based in Mumbai, but they decided to move back in with their partner who was working in a different location, Delhi and Bombay being common. A lot of families, they have both parents working. They have to support their children's education. Absolutely fine. They're actually saving on rent, double rent. Some people have moved into their own houses in the outskirts. And nobody has ever brought up compensation except for the guy who moved to London and said, yeah, I see Indian salary just doesn't cut it here. So are you okay if I join the London office? I'll go at the lower end of the spectrum. But yeah, there's a lot more that is, and that works into your report as well. Because when an employee considers his work, there's a lot more that goes in besides just the monetary compensation element, right? Just the fact that, he's not stressed. Nobody's watching over his shoulder all the time. Pata kitne keyboard time, how many strokes of the keyboard have you entered? It's just some random metric, when did you clock in? When did you clock out? You clocked out at 4, I'll cut half day's pay. That goes away. A lot of people don't even bother about the money that comes into the bank up to a point where it doesn't stop hurting, it doesn't start hurting. That's my long-winded answer. Sorry.
Sanjeev, Pradeep, have you seen any of this?
Yeah, I think Shashank's point is a valid point. For me, actually, this discussion on pay started. First of all, it's an inconsiderate discussion. This has been started by some HR folks to create work for themselves. I think, look, gone are the days when you pay people because labor, where cost plus money is what you pay for. You pay for the value that person brings to the company. And let's understand that doesn't change whether a person works wherever the person works from. So we should also be careful that we should not take this debate too far. We were never asking the people when we were paying them earlier that does she invest money or does she spend the money on a vacation. We never asked that questions to them. Today also we should not be asking the same questions that why. This is a company convenience too, organization convenience too, that people are working out of their locations. So let's not get away from the fact that I cannot then therefore penalize them to increase my bottom line. I think that would be a very, very inconsiderate, to the extent I would say, a human rights violation kind of discussion. So I would completely stay away from them. I have in fact stopped this debate in my company. One person in HR came and talked to this to me, and I actually explained to the person that, look, this is completely insensitive and we should not be having such a discussion. Maybe I have a little stronger view on this, but I think it's important to understand that value of a person to the company doesn't change by somebody working for somebody.
Yeah. And yeah, I pretty much kind of echo what Sanjeev and Shashank has been saying, right? So for us, it's predominantly a demand supply equation, how we're able to manage that. And currently the demand for cybersecurity, skilled cybersecurity professionals is at an all-time high, right? And we're not able to source enough supply. So if there was a professional who is available, but if I were to tell him, hey, you'll have to take a pay cut in order to be working out of your home location, he's going to say, no, thank you. Let me go with a different firm, right? Because there's a number of options for them to do. So it's determined by where we are able to source the talent. And one way of now allowing them to work from anywhere is also we are able to source talent from anywhere within India, right? So we don't have to require them to, let's say, come to your headquarters in Bangalore or be available in, say, Mumbai or Hyderabad. So whether you're in Muzaffarnagar or whether you're in Chennai or Coimbatore, whichever location you are based out of, as long as you're able to work and being able to make that work. Yeah.
Thank you. That's interesting. The other part, the other dimension of this that Shashank highlighted as well, is on performance management, right? And anybody who has a thought on this can talk about it. The thing that we see a lot on performance management is, and that is unfortunate, but it is a reality, is that the closer you are to your manager, the better or easier it is for you to be able to drive, influence, manage performance. We are not very metric driven. We try to be, but we are unfortunately, end of the day, apart from certain functions and roles, most others are not very metrics driven. So do you think in a hybrid environment where some people are not going to be around, where your manager to employee interaction is going to be limited to some extent, the quality of performance management will suffer again? Whoever wants to pick this up.
So, again, Baker Hughes used to be GE. 3 years back, it was Baker Hughes GE, right? And, most people know that GE just went ahead and dropped performance evaluation from the scheme of things, right? We stopped grading people. We thought that it is labeling, right? We moved to, as Baker Hughes, we continue to follow the same process. We set priorities and consider feedbacks, right? Continue doing this great thing, consider doing this thing differently, start this behavior, stop this behavior. That feedback cycle has worked very well for us. And also, we pretty much moved away from the manager concept as such. Most of the roles are leaders. I myself am a country manager with possibly, a direct work, the influenced workforce of maybe 200 people across multiple countries. But direct people reporting into me would be barely a handful. Right? Most with the other guys as well. It's all, you're supposed to lead without boundaries, is what we say. Performance management boils down to the ability to set joint priorities which are aligned to our organization's objectives, and then self-reporting of the progress against those priorities, self-initiative on continue and consider feedbacks. Do you think I should continue doing the way I'm working, right? If he doesn't do that, his manager then gets into the performance management mode. It is his manager's responsibility to not come at the end of the year and say, this guy is an F or this guy is an excellent, but come to his boss or to me, at the somewhere in the first quarter and say, I set up these priorities for him. I find him struggling. What do you want to do? So do we put him in a performance improvement plan? Do we set up coaching? Do we set him into an employee assistance program? So especially during this virtual working, the employee assistance program, as we talked about mental health issues, people wanting to talk to counselors, people have problems. They can't talk to people they know. And right now they're stuck only with the people they know very well, right? They would want to talk to a perfect stranger, get it out of their system, possibly get some useful guidance. We facilitate that. So performance management is taking a new dimension. As I said, for this new age, we need new tools. Some of these are old tools we just stocked away. We haven't used them much. We have to bring them back into the portfolio and start using them to lead more, to stop branding people, to lead with the tools which are very useful right now, to coach, to mentor. That's my take on this, right? At this one time.
Sanjeev, I'll be keen to hear your perspective. You have a large workforce which is on the field as well, which might not be very.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. Actually, Anand, you actually raise a very valid point, because we do we have seen the tendencies of managers doing performance evaluation based on a little bit of relationship factor and all that happening. And now suddenly they have to move to a far more objective way of trying to understand performance evaluation. So it's a tough transition for everyone. But one good thing that we are seeing is that I think people are getting therefore a little more focused on how and what they measure, because it's not everything else that they can take into account. They have to take into account only what is the output and what has happened. So it's becoming a little more narrow for the right reasons. What actually is not happening, and performance evaluation is not a year-end story. It goes through the year at different say points to help understand what's happening and help the person working with you improve, get them into better career groove, improve their skills. All that is part of the story, and that is getting more and more difficult because it's not easy for people to gauge what is happening at times with the feel and touch that people had earlier. So that is going to be the difficult part of performance evaluation. The easier part is going to be at the year end, you want to classify people and give some increment and all. That might become a little more easier, in fact. But the more difficult part and probably the more meatier part of the job of performance evaluation is getting more and more difficult. So this is something, Anand, we will have to think through. I have actually struggled to understand what needs to be done here. And we're trying a lot of things, but I'll tell you a simple example that we're trying is that in these circumstances, how have managers been able to build relationship, and how does the person below really value that? So it is valuing the manager is getting a little more, let's say more important, and therefore you seek feedback of the people under them, which is becoming a part of performance evaluation for the manager. But how do you do it for the subordinate is still something that we will need to think through. Are we really seeing skill improvement? Are we really seeing other improvements happening? I'm not able to gauge that well right now. So it's a struggle, Anand, that I think we need to find a way.
We'll close this, and we're at 5:48 IST, about 7-8 minutes to close. I wanted to get a view from all of you, and any particular order. Again, maybe Sanjeev, since you're here, maybe I'll start off with you. We've all seen a spike in attrition in the last. Every company has seen a spike in attrition in the last 6 to 8 months. Pradeep probably is the worst impacted of all of us, but I'm just assuming. But and a lot of it has been ascribed to the fact that we are all working for an organization that is a logo on our laptop screen for a large part. How do you build alignment with organization, team? So Shashank said that once in a while meeting together allows that to happen. But in a broader sense, how do you build company or context into what people are experiencing and working for you today?
Anand, it's a very deeper point that you make in terms of how do you build an organization. And I think what we tend to normally overlook is the fact that people come to work because they have a job, but people do their job because they have a cause. And that cause could be personal, the cause could be societal, cause could be the company, whatever it is. I think companies need to now make their statement more carefully of what they are in, what kind of business they are in, what kind of things they are doing, what kind of contribution to society is happening, because people are starting to get a little more concerned about, are we really helping society more and more? And there are other aspects of thinking that have changed in people in the last 2 years. They've started to value many other things than compared to what they were just valuing at work. So appeal to the employees and your USP to the employees has to significantly change. It was a little easier for us because the cause that we were after was a much more valuable cause for society. So much more easier for us. So we saw a little less attrition. But I don't see that if I don't keep that up, and it will not last. See, it's not so temporary. I cannot keep saying that 3 years ago or 7 years ago this happened and therefore we had a cause to work for. I can't do that anymore. So I think I will have to keep that up. So my only humble request always has been in any leadership forum is that create the cause, ensure that people relate to the cause and people will relate to the organization.
Frank, your views on this? I mean, I know, and Sanjeev has the advantage of cause being very easy to come by, given the nature of the industry and the organization. But I wonder what a cement company CEO would say in that regard, or a waste management company CEO, perhaps.
So, for us as well, and I resonate with Sanjeev. Cause is so critical, and it doesn't necessarily have to just be the cause of your organization. We are in the energy industry. Energy transition was a cause that energy security and energy transition. That was a big cause that people related to. When COVID was so bad that nobody stepped out of their house, there were 100 of my guys making sure the offshore rigs were running and oil production was not impacted, not for a single day. There were people who spent 100 days on a vessel, leaving their families and children behind, 100 days on a rig, 40 kilometers into the sea. And that's a very long time. Normally, they would spend 28, 30 days. The reason they were doing it was they did not want these, the energy security of India to suffer. That was a cause for them. The cause for the rest of the team, and we would connect and we would say that while we may be suffering or we may be struggling, there's a bunch of people who are struggling possibly a lot more than us. So what is a cause that we could contribute to together? So, we picked up a lot more CSR projects in this last 2 years. CSR just used to be something which you needed to do. But now this is something people wanted to do. There's so many CSR projects which are brought in. And we realize that 2% or 3% of your budget is also a huge amount of money. If you want to keep an orphanage running, if you want to pay the fees of people who lost their parents during COVID, that's not a lot of money. It's just the intent and the time. People started connecting. The other missing piece of the puzzle on the employee engagement bit was the last 2 years. And this came out very clearly when we were celebrating International Women's Day a couple of days back. Diversity numbers barely, crossed 20%. We struggled to get that number beyond 20%. Right now, I believe it's 100% because our employees said there's no way we could continue working without an entire family standing behind us. So if I'm working, it's because my wife is letting me work, 12 hours in front of this computer screen. I get my tea, I step out, my children are attending school, my daughter has given her exam and uploaded her answer sheet. While I'm sitting here, possibly in a call I can't step out of. And they hear you. Right? They earlier didn't know who your boss was, who your manager was, what you were working on. Small homes, Mumbai, or even big homes like Delhi or Gurgaon. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you're raising your noise and shouting. Your children know your working style. Suddenly, if your work culture is toxic and is not aligned with your family culture, you'd not want to work for that organization anymore. You can't get out of a room where you've been screamed and shouted at and go and face your children and your parents who are hearing that screaming and shouting. So the engagement with the family suddenly has to become a reality, right? And we managed to, identify that people, the entire families are working for us. I didn't lose a single person in this entire 2-3 years in India. We lost people in other locations. People were uncertain about, because this is again the oil and gas industry. Before the oil price went up to 158, went down to 68, 70. People jump ship, they get into another industry, which is looked as a sunrise industry. But these things, right? Empathy, a cause bigger than themselves in their organization or outside through CSR, and making the family a part of the workforce, right? Making sure that, I've pull it out. So on Women's Day, this is, my assistant got me to write a handwritten note, send it to every female member in my, wives of all of our employees with a small gift, which is freedom, celebrate your freedom. Keep writing handwritten notes. Every manager writes a handwritten note to their direct employees. They need to feel the connect. They need to, that we are an organization that care about them as well. It's just not an employee with a metric. So long-winded answer as usual. Sorry, you have to cut me short when you want me to stop faster. There you go.
Thank you. No, but that's a fair point. I mean, that's the whole thing about how do you build. It's an interesting. I've not really thought about this, but it's an interesting reflection. How do you go out of your room once you've been shouted at? And that's the difference between organizational culture and personal culture. But Pradeep, your views, and then I can come to you, Pradeep, on this.
Yeah, sure. And that's I would say so. That's a super critical aspect, right? In terms of having and chugging towards a common vision, shared vision, if you will. And especially in the earlier work environment, you get to see people, you get to see your managers, your work colleagues, and you start talking about what's happening within the work environment. You have some little bit of connectedness, I should say, right? But in these days, how do you get everyone to work towards that common shared vision? So over here, what we try to do is we kind of have that, let's say, over communication, right? How do we kind of talk to, how are we impacting our clients' lives positively in every day, right? When it comes to, let's say, what's happening with the world, right? The hybrid warfare, the cyber warfare, you get phishing, smishing, wishing, all these various attacks that's in the play. So basically, having employees or professionals looking at why we do what we do and how is that making an impact to our clients' lives and their personal lives, their employees as well. So all of that is what is, I would say, driving or helping us towards chugging towards a common shared goal. Yeah.
Finally, to you again on this.
Yeah, something Shashank said reminded me of the first ever CSR activity I did when I entered the workforce many years ago. I was working for an investment bank. We got out of the office and we were cleaning the River Thames, cleaning rubbish out of the Thames. Out of the 120 of us that were there together, I would say not a single one of us was thinking about the environment and the world. We were all thinking about, this is a day out of the office, it's fun, and that's it. So I think where your company exists in the wider community, given COVID deaths, given other disruptions that have happened, I think that is much more important today than it was before. That's certainly a differentiator for a company's brand. But I think this is why also at the start of the conversation, I said that, I think we'll go back to in-person working, because things like meeting, going out for lunch together, having dinner together, those interpersonal connections are much easier to manage if everybody is kind of together. So at home, I work in one room and my wife works in the room next door. So we both hear each other's colleagues, whether it's wonderful conversations or whether it's terrible conversations throughout the day. And so whenever we have a tea break or a coffee break, we tend to discuss each other's managers and each other's, work colleagues much, much more than we did 2 or 3 years ago. So I think everything the other panelists have said, I think resonates a lot with me as well.
So I'll do my last question to all of you, and this is literally more of a fun round than anything else. So Pratik, starting with you, what is the one thing that you would have started doing in the last 2 years, and one thing that you've stopped doing forever in the last 2 years?
One thing we've started doing is, the area that we live in has a lot of woodland. Before, I used to take the train into London, come back, and I didn't really explore. We found 6 duck ponds within a 10-kilometer walk of our house. And we've been on multiple 10-kilometer walks when we had nothing else to do and the trains were shut and the shops were shut. So I think that has been wonderful. One thing I've done much less is I think sitting in front of a computer at home is not that good for physical health otherwise. Before, I used to play sports a lot more. Now that has slowly just left my daily itinerary. So
with massive amounts of with envy that you have left all of us with your duck pond story, I'll turn to Pradeep. One thing, and be it professional, be it personal, completely stopped doing and then also started doing. Okay.
One thing I've started doing, given the time that I've had at home, is I've started perfecting the art of making tea, right? Myself, for both my wife and myself. So whether it's ginger or elaichi or mixing and matching. So at the end of the day, she still cribs as to the amount of time I take to make the tea, but still at the end of the day, the output is pretty good, right? So that's something I've perfected over the last 1.5 years. One thing I've stopped doing much less is something similar to Pratik, right? In terms of the amount of exercise and when I used to do the exercise. So these days, I still try to manage to get at least 30 or 45 minutes of exercise in. But earlier I used to follow, let's say, schedule, right? Every day mornings I used to do it. Nowadays it could be any time during the day. Before it's midnight, I get it done, but it's wayward, right? So that's something that I've started doing much less of. Yeah.
Shashank?
The duck pond, both my daughters, my wife and me being at home was next to impossible earlier, right? Everybody was having a dog, right? That's what we did eventually. In Mumbai, you cannot get a big dog. We got a dog and realized this is one of the best things possibly we've done, right? A huge amount of de-stressing. So, and it's a lifelong commitment, right? It's 15 years, you've committed that you're going to take care of the new member of the family. So that, very glad I did it. One thing I've stopped doing is possibly every week I would jump into 4 flights. Anybody just said, come Shashank, we need to have this meeting, I would just jump into my car, get into a flight and go. I don't do that anymore. Right? Even if somebody says we need to meet, I first say, can't we just talk? Right? Can't we get on a Teams call? Do I really need to travel and waste 2 days to come there? Think about the carbon footprint. And why do I need to do this? And I was the biggest GNL spender in my organization. I traveled for 3 months in 2020. When was the shutdown? 2020. Right? And in India, Asia Pac, India, China, within those 3 months, the amount of money I spent on travel and living dollars was more than the entire amount of money anybody spent in any of those locations throughout the rest of the year. So never going to get there again, right? Never going to get there again. No chance.
Sanjeev.
Yeah, I think I've stopped convincing my wife that I work hard because now she notices and understands that I really work hard. So that I have stopped. the thing I've started doing more is getting out and getting into the nature, because work from anywhere allowed me to really take myself away from home and really explore nature much more. So I think that I've started doing much more, and I literally am taking those kind of breaks every month or two.
Thank you very much. And as we come to a close, and I wanted to close with this because I had a suspicion that this is how it's probably going to play out. And it did, because one of the things that has happened as a result of this, being able to be away from the pressures of a workplace allows us to be a little more, find ourselves, find our interests a little bit more, perhaps. Obviously, we have been spending more hours in front of the laptop than we would have spent while we were in office. But a lot of that would have been consumed by planes or cars or some unnecessary conversations and so on sometimes. Those unnecessary conversations sometimes are very necessary in the longer run, perhaps as well. They also build bonds, social networks, and so on and so forth. But I think all of us have gone through this experience where we have been able to do things more, a bit differently, with a wider horizon, with more time at our hands than we might have been able to do otherwise. And as we go back into, I think, and this is true for the larger audience as well, when we go back to our whichever form, be it hybrid or be it completely work from office, we are going to have to accept that a lot of the flexibility that we have become used to will go away again. We will have to become used to the fact that we have to again tie ourselves down to the 8 o'clock, getting into the car routine again. We'll have to tie ourselves down to the 8 p.m. car routine again from office and so on, the traffic, everything else. And that just is a drag on the mind space that we have been able to give to work in the last couple of years. But at the same point in time, this whole conversations, the ability to talk to our colleagues, the ability to be able to influence people by having a face-to-face direct conversation, the arm around the shoulder conversation that we were just having, that also is an important part of the entire structure. So I think there's a middle point that we still don't know where it will land, but it will land somewhere in the middle. Our suspicion is that it won't go one way or the other entirely. There are certain things we will probably not do again. Like Shashank's example, I don't think we will be flying as much as we used to earlier. And maybe it's not a good news for business carriers or business hotels, but definitely our travel budgets will come down. We see the value. This conversation would have had to happen in person in a hotel. We can easily have this conversation on a platform like this. So while some of these things will permanently change in some way, some of these things will again go back to what it used to be. I think the next 2-3 years is going to be an interesting story for all of us. But what I really wanted to do is thank all 4 of you for having taken time out on a Saturday. Afternoon for early afternoon for Prateek, late afternoon for everybody in India. Thank you very much for spending your time with us. This has been an extremely interesting conversation because I personally felt all of you were very honest, and that is that you're not following a company line or some such dictum in your conversations, and I really value that. Thank you once again, and it's been a pleasure to have you all on this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.